whawhitai mo le awanoa, whawhitai ia tātou a whaatasi mai le nei aso, mo le tautalanga lea, mo le talanoa, ia, susu mai, te tala mai a au, o longo o Jeremy Leatinu'u, o Tina o Evelyn Joseph, nā sau mai le nuu o Lapea, ma le nuu mauli o Ngāti Mani o Poto, o lo tama o Loma Leatinu'u, nā sau mai le nuu o Bailoa Whaleata, mata vai Safunge. Yeah, welcome.
So let's start with Earth Pusher, which is the first work in the program, and it in a way is a departure from some of the earlier video works that you had made. And I wonder if you could, well, first, before we talk about the actual work, was this work or this meeting the catalyst for changing the direction of your practice and the move towards finding a different mode of storytelling in addition to documenting a physical gesture or an action? In the case of this work, a performance that took place with the movement of soil from Auckland to Waiheke. Was this meeting the thing that sort of changed or the direction of your work?
Yeah, I think after the Training Day project and the edit that Ian had put together for that project, I came to realise the strength in how the camera and moving image can pull a story or a narrative out of a location or a set of actions that perhaps I wasn't really aware of at the time. And so with Earth Pushers, it being actually part of I suppose you could say like a sculpture symposium or sculptural art event in Waiheke, and my offering being 700 bags of soil being transferred from one location to the next. I had an opportunity to have a show at Te Tuhi and proposed that that contribution be a film, and that's when I approached Ian and said, I suppose similar things to Training Day, where I'd like to document the event but have an underlying narrative be a massive part in that film. And so I had to really think about, I suppose, the concept of a protagonist or a main character, or some of the themes that could exist in a short story in the format of moving image.
Do you want to just tell us a little bit about the history of this extractive history as a background to, and the reason why you chose to do this performance, to draw attention to that history?
Yeah, so part of the research as that was set in my proposal for the event was me becoming aware of what is called shingle pushing, or the shingle pushing practice, and that involved in the early 1900s settlers travelling from mainland Auckland and heading towards the islands of the Waitemata Harbour and extracting tons and tons of shingle from the beaches of these islands. And what they would do is they transport them back over to the mainland Auckland and include that into the cement while they were building the infrastructure of the city. And so what was left behind after that practice was really impactful environmental damage to a lot of the coasts of the islands, which you can still see today, just really large, massive gouges of the shoreline. And so part of the proposal was to highlight this history and this practice, and obviously those of us who live in Auckland who benefit from the infrastructure that this practice helps support or build, was to kind of make people aware, ferrygoers in particular, aware of this history by, I suppose, a gesture of repatriation, but obviously not with shingle but with soil.
another work that kind of metaphorically draws from the past is From the Back of the Canoe to the Front of the Canoe, and that recounts the historic migration of the first Maori people. Could you tell us a little bit about this work and the story behind it?
Cool. The story actually comes from this book here, Ngā Iwi o Tainui, which was put together by Pei Te Hurinui Jones and Bruce Biggs. And I consider this book as, I suppose, the equivalent to a Bible for those of us who have ancestral links to the canoe of Tainui, which is predominantly in the central part of the North Island. And there are, I think there are like close to 100 stories in this book. But one of those stories is the story that I share in the film. And the film itself identifies that Tainui, upon their arrival to Aotearoa, had journeyed through after coming from Maketu, which is closer to the eastern side of the North Island, rounded what we call the area of the Coromandel, and then had come through the Waitemata. There you go. And instead of going all the way to the tail or the top of the North Island, they decided to follow a river, which is known as the Tamaki River, where they noticed that there was a mountain, and that mountain in Māori is Otahuhu, or in English in Mount Richmond. And the tohunga, or the priest of the canoe, had climbed that mountain to see what was beyond. And when he got to the top, he realized that actually there was a large harbour on the other side, which connected to the west coast. And so from there, they dragged the canoe across land. The area that we're talking about in Otahuhu is the narrowest piece of land in the entire country. And they dragged the canoe across, carried on through the harbour, and finally making their way down to their final resting place, which is in Kawhia. And so that's the story that Tainui people tend to follow, tend to refer to. However, the book itself acknowledges that there is another account where they actually didn't cross the land, and in fact did go around the top of the North Island and then come down to Kawhia via the ocean on the west coast.
Tell us a little bit about how the two of you work in terms of preparing for these films, and perhaps the location scouting, the research that goes into finding and thinking about, because there's an economy of image in this, right? There's very few images, but they're very potent.
There's usually an economy of budget too, so that is a factor. Usually Jeremy will call me up and say, hey, what are you up to? Come on over. And he's got something, that he has been offered a show or something like that. And that's the initial stage. And then he will often give me a really basic script or something like that. And then it sort of develops from there, depending on things like time frame. What is it? Is it is it going into a gallery? Is it the context of it? And then we kind of take it from there. But it's always we do testing, like with a format, an aspect ratio, particularly as those works have gone on and developed. I've always found it really quite challenging and difficult because it's kind of not my world. But that's I think you're jumping into a void, something that you don't quite understand, and that's the exciting part of it.
Perhaps we can continue that conversation in the next work, which is called When the Moon Sees the Sun. This is another work that uses this idea of transition or circularity, where night sees day, where loss is kind of countered with growth, and perhaps it's the most directly personal work for you. Jeremy, could you tell us a little bit about this work and your and the decision you made to structure it in a particular way?
The foundation for the film actually was already completed in 2017 during my first year of learning Te Reo Māori. And part of the assignment within that program was to compose a song or a waiata for someone special. And so my grandfather had passed away in 2014, and so that had initially pushed me to go and learn the language in 2016, and by 2017 I had that song, which was a six-part stanza of a waiata, which tracked his life from his birth to his death, and that became the foundation for the story of the film. Hence why the film has several chapters. The only chapter that was a new addition, I suppose, compared to the song, was the addition of Manaya, who's 6 years old now, but she was only one in the film. That's for this film. So it was a tribute. It was a tribute song, and this is a tribute film that follows my grandfather's birth, who was at birth adopted, and not necessarily adopted through whāngai or Māori adoption, where they stay within the iwi or tribe or hapu, but actually through the European or Western adoption process. And so he was found and raised by a family in the north, by the Perana family from Tautoro, which is in south of Kaikohe. And he was raised right up until he was old enough to leave. And when he met my grandmother, they decided to marry. At that point, they were living in Auckland. And when he went through the process of a marriage certificate, he was made aware that his surname was different to the family name that raised him. And so he had all these questions around, you know, what's his family name? And so they confessed that he was adopted. He then went to go and pursue his biological family, which he later finds out that we're from Maniapoto, which is in the central part of the North Island, and reconnects with his family, who were completely unaware of his existence, to then find out that he was the eldest child of 7. And so the film does track that experience and that story and that path. It also doesn't hide from some of the, I suppose, trickle-down effect that something like that has on someone that age, and that being kind of trickled down through his family and his children, and some of the after effects that you kind of see from that type of experience. And that, I suppose, that trauma or that experience doesn't change until he becomes a grandfather, and then that's when things kind of switch. And so a big part of the structuring of the film was actually trying to put forward memories or stories or what do you call it, like ways in which people related to my grandfather from their perspective. And so the first chapter is his biological mother talking to him while she's still pregnant with him, right through to his adopted mother talking to him, going through to his stepfather, and then my grandmother kind of chiming in the story, and then my mother, and then me too, Manaya.
Let's move on to the next work, which also brings up a reoccurring idea in your work, which is sort of the connective tissue of water, and the way that water carries bodies, carries histories. It's something that's also an elemental force that sustains growth and our life. There's a sense in this that water is something both completely mundane, used to wash clothes, but then also has perhaps a kind of sacred significance. Do you want to discuss perhaps a little bit that duality that plays out in this film?
Yeah, I think people's perspectives or indigenous knowledge towards water can be quite vast, and also depending on where people are located, their cultural practices or understandings. And I kind of wanted to kind of think of it from the perspective of someone that simply lives in the city and interacts with water on a daily basis, and perhaps might not necessarily stop to think about how these practices actually have traces to, I suppose, older practices before urbanisation, before these cities were built. And so things like buying store-bought water versus going to a natural spring, or the idea of sacred water, and kind of connecting that to perhaps the idea of cleansing and washing your washing to make it clean again. Actually, the idea of sacred water came from, and this is a story I shared with Ioana when we were first talking about this film, was that when we moved into the house that we live in now, there was a bottle of water in the cupboard, and it was like it was wrapped in the Fizzy logo thing, and I was about to go and grab it out of the water and just like unscrew it and tip it out, and my wife goes, "What are you doing?" And I was like, well, I don't know whose bottle is it. She goes, "No, that's blessed water. Don't throw it down the drain." And so it did make me think about like this idea of transforming water into something else, and perhaps how we can identify that in an urban setting like that particular story I just shared with you.
Let's move on to the last work, which is the work that's also in the exhibition, Te Whakawhenei. Could you talk to us a little bit about the idea of this work and this kind of idea of crossing or transition that the title evokes?
Yeah, this one was quite, I don't want to say easier in a way, but because two poles had really kind of been established in the script building of this film. And those two poles in the beginning were simply the idea that there was a point A and a point B in the story, and point A being in the North Island, in Northland, and then point B being in the South Island, and that there was this always like this sense of cold meets hot, or slow meets fast, tall meets short, and so there's a lot of this binary happening throughout the film, and it also centers around a story that was inspired by a story that came from the brother of my grandfather, who actually made that crossing, or that whakawhitinga from Northland to Christchurch when he was young, a young Māori boy from a very small rural town in the 60s, and heading down to the South Island and for him, having never left home, was pretty much his overseas experience at that time. And so there was I suppose, an intention to really try and capture what that feeling would feel like when you have grown up and all you know is where you've lived, and that landscape is all you know, and the smells and the textures, and then to suddenly travel to a place that is almost the complete opposite, where the mountains are not like your mountains, where the grass is not like your grass, and the waters are much cooler or colder than they are from where you are from. And so what that kind of experience would be like.
The main narrative is kind of interspersed with these extraordinary time-lapse sequences of an unfolding silver fern or a kind of pollinating flower. Ian, I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about how you created these sequences.
I live in a 2-bedroom shack in the bush, and one of those bedrooms I blacked it off and got a mamuku fern and set up a 16mm time-lapse camera that ran really for, I think, about 6 or 7 months. A shot would often take sometimes 3 months, and what I soon found out is even if you kind of put the light in a certain area where you think the plant would grow, it'd suddenly grow like this, and then it would find, for some other reason, it would go out of shot. So you could spend 3 months and you'd have nothing. It was nerve-wracking running that through the processor, that I dragged out, during COVID lockdowns out of my basement and refurbished and rebuilt for this project and that. But I remember sitting there in the washroom in the dark saying, please don't break down. There's months worth of work running through it. But that's the nature of film. It's of analogue film. There's risk. There's risk and reward. So, yeah.
We're coming to the end of the session, Jeremy, but I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about perhaps what is coming up next for you. One of the fascinating things watching these 5 works is how more complicated and involved they become as they go on, and the introduction of different approaches and technologies to build this storytelling. So I'm curious what will come after this endeavour.
I think throughout the 5 films we've kind of really scaffolded, I suppose, the approaches that we've implemented in the way that we make films. Like with Earth Pushers, I think that was our kind of introduction in how we would work together. And with Mai Te Keo Te Waka, again, it was another stepping stone in applying new approaches. Taonga Tuku Iho was a film where we decided let's work with a track and a dolly and a crane to really kind of push the visual side of being able to tell the story. That film was also the first time where we brought in a sound designer and a composer. And then, of course, this film, I think, is an accumulation of all those skills and experimental things that we tried out with the other 4, and just pouring it into this film, with the addition of having someone like Tim come on board and ask a set of questions in terms of what direction I wanted the sound to take, and then allowing him the creative space to do what he does, to completely transform the way you would experience the work. And same for John. So in terms of like what comes next, I think there are ideas, or an idea for another film, and one that might be a companion film to When the Moon Sees the Sun. That one, I think, is going to be a lot more involved. It's going to require traveling, and traveling to a tropical island, and traveling with a crew. And I think, obviously, still imploring and working with people who are experts in their profession, sound designers, composers. It's really hard to kind of think about working on a project that is going to move backwards from where we've kind of come. And so in terms of a film practice, or being a participant in making a film, or being a fan of cinema, I think that's kind of the direction that I'll take.
I look forward to it. Jeremy, Ian, thank you so much for sharing with us today, and we wish you all the best.
Cool. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.